Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I think we're at the point, or at least really close to it, where we're sick of COVID. Not just what it's doing to people or what it's doing to the economy, but we're just sick of everything COVID. This virus has seemed to affect pretty much every area of our lives, and not for the better. I've read about people already trying to move on from 2020 simply because they're sick of how their lives are going and how they've been affected. In some ways, I completely get that. All of our lives have definitely been changed, and it seems that everything has suddenly become difficult. But the reality is that in a lot of ways, everything happening in our world is really just a magnification of what happens already in lives all over the world every day. Individually, we experience things or times or situations that bring us difficulty, pain, struggle, loss, and sadness. It's an unfortunate reality of life. It's just that now we're in some sense experiencing it together. Woody Allen is quoted as saying, "Life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's all over much too soon." And that is so true. Yes, life can be hard. It can be very hard, but it's also precious. And it isn't about how much difficulty we do or we do not have. It's all about how we respond in those moments. The story of Joseph is a tragic, amazing, and beautiful example of all of that rolled into one. We know that Joseph was a favorite son of Israel. In picking up the story in Genesis 37, we find a 17-year-old Joseph that is spoiled and still tattles on his brothers. At this point in the story, his mother Rachel is most likely dead, and many scholars believe that Leah is also dead, with her two handmaidens now being made the official wives of Jacob. This makes an already horrible family dynamic that much worse. Wives and sons who were relegated to life as essentially second-class family are now elevated to equal status. In all those years of pain and unfair treatment they received, now are directed in hatred and vengeance towards that spoiled boy Joseph. And then he starts having dreams about ruling over them. Obviously, this is pointing in a very ugly direction, but Joseph seems blissfully unaware of it all. It all comes to a head when Israel sends Joseph out to check on all those older brothers, when they are apparently feeding their flocks near Shechem. This may be why Israel feels the need to check on them, because Shechem was a site of where two of those same brothers had slaughtered all the men that lived in that city for having defiled their sister. So it begs the question of why were they still hanging around that area? But it definitely brings understanding to Israel being concerned enough to send this brother who was so hated to go and check on. When Joseph arrives alone in this very dangerous place for any of the descendants of Israel, he appears to be completely oblivious to his danger, because the Bible records him wandering the fields, casually looking for his brothers, until someone finds him. The Bible doesn't tell us much about this individual, other than he knew who Joseph and who his brothers were, and was close enough to hear where they were going. The stranger would go on to change the rest of Joseph's life. He tells Joseph that his brothers have taken the flocks to Dothan. Now this one comment turns Joseph's life from one of spoiled luxury to a life of slavery. When Joseph arrives in Dothan, he's thrown into a pit and sold into slavery by his brothers. While this pit is in the wilderness, many Bible scholars believe that his brothers had actually gone to the city of Dothan, which was a thriving trade city situated on one of the main trade routes of the time. The brothers didn't go there for grass for their flocks, but rather they went to Dothan to shirk their responsibility and really to have some fun. Being caught where they were not supposed to be by the spoiled tattletale seemed to flip the switch that triggered all the emotions that they were keeping pent up, and ultimately pushed them to sell their half-brother into slavery. Now, had Joseph not met the stranger, he would have never known that his brothers were in Dothan. And if he had never gone to Dothan, Joseph would have never ended up in slavery. But if Joseph hadn't ended up in slavery, his family would have died from the famine, and the known world would have been devastated by that same 7-year famine. I'm sure that in his early years as a slave, Joseph no doubt lamented ever having met that stranger, because that single encounter forever changed his life. It brought about immense amounts of pain and suffering. It destroyed the visions that he was having in his dreams. It ended Joseph's life of comfort. Now, so many of us, we would have despised the day that we met that stranger. And this is why it's so vital for us to remember that God is always in control, even when things seem so desperately wrong. When we find ourselves in places that we dread, in times that we feel nothing but despair, in circumstances where we are desperately out of control of what's happening, we need to remember that Joseph's slavery was what brought about his deliverance. It brought about his family's deliverance and his world's deliverance. As we end this devotional, the city of Dothan, where Joseph was turned over to a life of slavery, is mentioned one more time in the Bible. That's when a king sends an army to capture Elisha and his servant in 2 Kings chapter 6. It's here that Elisha tells his servant, "Don't be afraid, because those who are with us are more than those who are against us." And then his servant's eyes are open and he sees all the angelic hosts that stood protecting him. See, foresight for what God was doing in that situation provided the insight for the immediate circumstance for that servant. And it always will for you and I. We must learn to see the struggles of our lives, not just as times that we need to get through, but as moments that are vital to God's plan. With one eye, we see the struggles of life, but with the other, we see by faith that God has a purpose for it all. With one of our eyes, we see the chaos and the pain that we're going through, but with the other, we can see God working on our behalf for his will. Remember, the thoughts he has for you are for good and to bring you to his beautiful purpose in your life. God bless.